you, everyone. Thank you for spending your lunchtime listening to me talk about immigration law. My goal here today will be to talk about both perspectives of a company and hiring foreign national workers, if that is an opportunity that presents itself. And if you are a foreign student yourself or a foreign graduate and are thinking about or are starting a company, paths for the entrepreneur to get immigration status as well. So I'll be looking at both of those particular issues. It's a pretty small group here today, so please feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, ask questions. I'd rather have a dynamic conversation than just wait until the end. So without further ado, I'll get started. So, any bigger best direction to point? There we go. Here's who I am. I have a firm in Chicago called Meltzer. We take a technology-driven approach to handling immigration. We've been around for about 8 years. We handle several hundred clients. We work specifically in the business immigration space. So we work with everyone from individual entrepreneurs up to Fortune 500 companies. And we pride ourselves on being responsive, transparent, and compassionate. And we've been a fast-growing company as well. So, like some of you who are starting companies here and want to be growth-oriented, we have the same perspective. We are on the 5,000 fast-growing companies in 2021, and today I am here. So, today we're going to talk about work authorization generally. We're going to talk about international students and when they can work for companies. We're going to talk a little bit about specific visas, and then we'll also talk about green cards, the general idea. All right, so who can work for a U.S. company? On the highest level, U.S. citizens, permanent residents, which are known as green card holders. There are people with work authorized visas, which are sponsored by a company. And there are people who have work authorization that is not company specific. You can have any of those people work for your company. Most important question that I often get from foreign founders or foreign founders to be is, what status do you need to start a company? Do I need to have a certain visa to go file for my LLC or C Corp? And the answer is no. You can always start a company. That's the easy answer. The question of what will you do for that company once you've gone and created it, that's the hard question. But if you just want to go ahead and create an LLC or a C Corp, you can do that at any time. So let's talk about individuals who are here on as students first. I think that's the most common issue that people are thinking about. So generally, students are here in one of two visa statuses. There's F1, which is a general student status, and there's J1, which is, J is in a variety of flavors, but generally it's a question about where the money comes from. If you're on J1, if you're getting foreign funding, or you're something like a Fulbright scholar, those individuals will typically be on J1. So on an F1, when an individual is graduating from school, they are eligible for what's called OPT, or optional practical training. OPT is given to every graduate generally for 12 months. And then for those individuals who have a STEM-based degree, they're usually eligible for an additional 24 months of work. So if you have a STEM degree, you can get 36 overall months of work authorization. The first 12 months are really flexible. You can work as an intern, you can work for money, you can work for free, you can work for equity. As long as you are working, you are generally in status for the purposes of F1. These additional 24 months, someone who's on the STEM path, those are more restricted. So the person who's on a STEM extension needs to be paid. It needs to be a W-2 employee traditionally. And the employer must say that the person is getting supervision and training to qualify for that authorization. That form gets reviewed by the school. And so for foreign founders, there's often a question of how are you creating supervision and training? I have not had any specific conversations with DSOs here, but generally my advice is if you are a foreign founder, to make sure you have a company that has a board. That board will, someone on that board is signing off and providing supervision and training to the executive, and that is what you'll be using to qualify for that STEM exemption.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the first 12 months where it says it can be unpaid, are there issues we run into generally about, not an immigration, but minimum wage violations? How does that factor in?
It's a totally different issue about what is a company, so like how is it being classified. So clearly if someone is being an employee, like clearly the DOL has rules on what's should be a paid or could be an unpaid internship. Generally where I care less about the paid issue is usually as a founder, they're not being paid by their company because they're not, as an owner, you don't need to be paid generally in your own company. So if you are doing it, you have the equity stake, and you're not being paid because you're in a pre-revenue stage, I don't think it's problematic. Clearly, from a company perspective, about minimum wage laws or any other wage issues, you would want to adhere to that. But the unpaid piece usually factors in most for founders or shorter internships. Okay. The other part about STEM OPT is that the company must use something called E-Verify. So important for all of you who are running companies. Every time you hire an employee, you must complete an I-9. Regardless of whether the person is a U.S. citizen, a green card holder, sponsored for a visa, whatever, you must complete an I-9. There is an additional feature that can do work authorization checks called E-Verify. E-Verify is a free government resource that you will basically plug in the work authorization documents that an employee has provided. And the government will get the databases they have access to and say whether they think they're legitimate. To hire anyone on STEM OPT, your company must use E-Verify. So if you are having the opportunity to hire someone who's on STEM OPT, know that you need to use that, get involved with the E-Verify first. The only thing to know about that is that once you decide to use it, you can use it for everyone going forward. It is free, but it is just a little bit of additional administrative procedure for your company. Okay. For individuals who are on F1 and are still in school, the way you will generally hire them is that they will get something called CPT. CPT is curricular practical training. And so that is something that is administered through the university. So at the University of Illinois, I believe most times to be eligible for CPT, someone has to have completed a full year of coursework at the University of Illinois. And then the company is going to say, that person is going to come here to do the following responsibilities. And the school will say, great, that seems to align with their person's program. So if someone's in a electrical engineering program and you're a hardware company and the person's going to be doing some kind of electrical engineering, great. If you are an accounting company and they have an electrical engineering background, there might be some questions. The CPT generally is authorized for 1 year at a time. All right, so that's F1 students. Individuals who are on J1, they are often given up to 36 months of academic training, is the technical term for it, which is work authorization, if they're in a STEM field. If they're not in a STEM field, it's often 18 months. So J1s and F1s both are now eligible for 36 months of work authorization total. Those who are not in a STEM field will be given 18, as opposed to 36. Okay, so that's hiring students. Any questions about students before I start to move on to other visas? Yes?
Hi, so my name is Jenny Park. I work at DSO actually
Okay.
in the EIR at
Great.
university. And so I just wanted to note for J1 students, PhD students will get 36 months regardless of
Oh, great.
field.
Okay,
So once they complete their
perfect. I got this idea wrong. PhD students automatically get 36 months. No, I appreciate the correction. Okay, so the next categories of visas I'm going to go over are company-sponsored visas. And I'm going to go over this both from the perspective of companies hiring and from the perspective of being a foreign entrepreneur. I'm not dividing this into two sections. I'm going to try to go over both of those categories at the same time. So the most common visa that individuals get sponsored for is called an H-1B. An H-1B is a specialty occupation visa. And so what that means is it is for positions that require a particular degree or degrees to do the job, and the person who is being sponsored has a degree in a related field. A classic example would again be like an engineer, someone who are hiring a chemical engineer. Generally, you need a degree in chemical engineering to do that job. The person who you're hiring has a degree in chemical engineering. That's going to be a really classic fit. Things that are difficult in H-1B are things that are more amorphous, things like marketing, consulting, anything where management roles that are more just generally strategy-based and not based on any particular field, those can be more challenging to get. So a couple of really important things. One is that you, as a company, are committing to paying what's considered a prevailing wage. So the Department of Labor has data on different occupations, divides them by geography. And so when you are hiring an H-1B worker, you do have to pay what is considered a prevailing wage for the job. It's not just a negotiated wage. The second part is that the H-1B is good for 3 years at a time, for up to 6 years total. And after that 6 years, the person has exhausted their H-1B status, unless they have already been sponsored for a green card process. So are some limits on H-1B. For those who are getting H-1B for the first time, there is way more demand than there is supply of H-1Bs. So there are 85,000 new H-1Bs granted each year. So those are people who have not held H-1B in the past. To get one of those H-1Bs, there is a lottery process. So we are in the thick of that lottery process right now in terms of getting started with our clients. The lottery will open and be available March 1st to 17th this year. And you'll see in last year there were 483,000 submissions into this lottery. So the government ended up selecting 127,000 names in that lottery. They select more names than they have visas available because some will be denied. Some people will not actually end up pursuing an application after being selected in the lottery. But last year there was about 26% selection rate. So it is challenging to get through that lottery process. So for employers who are considering this, the most important thing is apply early and often don't wait until the last year, which you might be thinking about it. Is get your employees into the lottery as early as you possibly can consider them, because there's no guarantee of selection in any given year. For those who are selected in the lottery, a couple of important things. One is if you're on F1, your OPT will expire between the time of that lottery submission and when H-1B actually starts on October 1st, which is not uncommon. Say your OPT expires on June 1st. There is something called cap gap, which will extend your OPT work authorization through September 30th, so that there hopefully is not any gap between when your OPT is expiring and when H-1B is starting. For those who've already been through this lottery process, you are able to move employers without going again through this lottery. So once you've had a lottery submission be successful and had an H-1B approval, you can port from one employer to another, or you can hire similarly H-1B workers from another employer. You still have to submit a complete application for that to happen, but you don't have to go through this lottery process to do that either. One last thing to note is that there are employers out there who don't have to go through this lottery process. They are considered cap exempt. Cap exempt employers are typically research institutions or universities, and they're affiliated businesses. So the University of Illinois, cap exempt institution. So you don't have to go, the University of Illinois wants to hire someone, they don't have to go through that lottery process. Similarly, there are organizations that aren't technically the university, but are affiliated, usually things like university hospitals or affiliated research institutions. They are also cap exempt. One thing to note is that if your first employer is cap exempt, so if you are on H-1B and you get your first H-1B is with the University of Illinois, you cannot port to a cap subject employer, one of these institutions that would normally go through the lottery, without going through that lottery process. So even though you have H-1B, You can't just go work for a private company without going through that lottery first. Yes.
So that first 25% that you mentioned on the lottery, is there any criteria besides random selection that determines that?
Yeah, so there's 65,000 for anyone and an additional 20,000 spots that are only for individuals who have U.S. master's degrees or higher. The way the lottery works is they run the general lottery first, and then anyone who has a master's degree or higher who wasn't selected in that first lottery will then be in the master's only lottery. So you have like a little tick up. I think it's, if you have like a master's degree, it might be close to like 35% as opposed to 25%, but still not a tremendous, like huge benefit. That's as of today, those are the only two things. Do you have a master's degree or
The rest of it's random.
the rest of it's
Not
truly
merit-based.
not, there's nothing to it that is based on the company, the wage. The Trump administration was considering giving it wage-based, that they would, based on the salary that was being offered, give the highest preference, but that didn't end up actually going into place. The Biden administration has not indicated at this time that they're looking to pursue something similar. So as of today, it is really, truly rare. Okay, so if you are an entrepreneur type, H-1B can be available to you, but it can be tricky. So H-1B requires to consider an employer-employee relationship. And that can most easily be defined as, can the company fire you? So if you are an entrepreneur and you own the majority of your company, it's really hard to show that the company can fire you. So for companies where there is one primary entrepreneur, H-1B is possible, but it requires some corporate structuring that isn't always fun because you have to then create a board that has a lot of independent authority and can remove you from your own company. And understandably, not every entrepreneur wants to go with that. If you are part of a multi-founder team, there's 4 founders, and you own, one of the H-1B workers owns 25% of the company, generally that's not going to be an issue because that one person is not going to be able to control the company independently and can be pushed out by the other 3 co-founders. The last thing is that there has to be availability of work. And so one of the most common questions I get from entrepreneurs who are interested in H-1B is how much money does my company need to have? There's no actual answer to that question. The H-1B does not need to have any amount of money at the time. But generally, I always have to show that there is 2 things. One is that there are multiple employees at the company. If you are the only person, it's going to be hard to demonstrate how you're getting everything done. The second is that while there's no amount of money you have to have, it's important to show that there is something that's going to make your company work. So it's either, I look for one of 3 things. Money in the bank, wherever that money came from, it doesn't really matter. 2 is ongoing revenue. So if you don't have a lot of money, but you're selling your product and you're getting ongoing revenue each month, that's great. Or 3, if you're in a pre-revenue stage, you don't have money, but you do have contracts saying, from a company saying, we're going to buy this for this amount of money, that in my mind also is going to suffice for H-1B purposes. All right, so that's the overview of H-1B. Because H-1B is the most common, I want to see if anyone has any questions before I move on. Okay. 2 other visas that are very similar to H-1B are H-1B1 and E3. H-1B1 is specifically for Chileans and Singaporeans. E3 is for Australians. These are both technically capped as well. I don't know whether anyone in the government is actually keeping track of the cap or what happens, but nonetheless, no one has ever said that the numerical number has been exhausted, so these are available all year round. The benefit of that is that you apply at any time, and as opposed to H-1B, you have to apply through a centralized immigration agency in the US, the USCIS. You can apply for these directly at a consulate, which makes the applications cheaper, faster, and honestly, they just have a lower standard of review, so it's easier to get them approved. Okay, so those are some really common visas. I want to talk about something that's a little different before we talk about some other visas, because this is one of the things that we see most often for university-based founders, is there's something called the International Entrepreneur Rule. So this is not technically a visa, it is a authorization to enter the US and work, but it's not visa-based. It's a sort of a highly technical thing, but at the end of the day, you are still able to come to the US and work and live here. So if you are working for a company, or started a company rather, and the company has, you as a founder own at least 10% of the company, you can apply for this international entrepreneur role to come to live and work in the US. I put some history up here, which is not that interesting. If you care, it's there, but the important thing is here. One, the company must be no more than 5 years old at the time that you file. Two, the person must own at least 10% of the company. You have 3 international founders who get this. So if you have more than 3 international founders in the company, we'll have to talk about how else people get it, but there are 3 international founders who each own 10%. They can each get this parole. And then you need to demonstrate one of these 3 things. One is that you have received at least $250,000 from successful venture capitalists. So not your friends and family, but rather a venture capital firm. 2 is that you have at least $100,000 in funding in government grants. And the third one is additional reliable or compelling evidence the company is in a place that they can have substantial or fast growth. The first 2 categories are really, really, really clear. Third category is because the Biden administration only reactivated this when Biden came into office, there are very few applications on this last part. I don't know how exactly the government is looking at it. It would be something where it would probably depend on a lot of factors to see whether it could be successful. One thing to note about this is that if this is a path being considered, these applications are taking an extraordinarily long time right now, taking about a year to review. So if this is a path that is compelling for an international entrepreneur, it makes sense to get started on this early.
Have you seen anybody being approved for this?
Yes, there are approvals.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think the majority of people are in the first category. I don't know how many people are getting government grants, although I think that's pretty clear.
No.
Generally the question is about company structure and actually getting the grants, but if you have a DOE or a DOD grant for, an amount that is higher than $100,000 is a pretty clear evidence. The question is really about the investors in the first one. So the more substantial the investor is, the better off your application is. Like someone who is an angel investor, that's weak. Someone, if you're getting money from Sequoia or you got accepted into Y Combinator or something like that, that makes your application stronger. The rules were written by the VC industry, and so they are biased to VC investors. Okay. Our thing now is that if you initially get it for 30 months, to get an extension for an additional 30 months, the requirements change a little. The entrepreneur can drop from 10% ownership to 5% ownership, so if you're getting diluted, that's okay as long as it's not diluted below 5%. And then you need to look for at least an additional $500,000 in qualifying funding, or you need to look for revenue generation of $500K a year or more, or substantial growth. So these are going to be one of these 4, not all of these. Okay. The next common visa I want to go over is TN. And TN is specifically for Canadian and Mexican citizens. So what used to be known as NAFTA and is now the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement allows for Canadians and Mexican citizens to come into the US and vice versa to Canada and Mexico, but only in very specific occupational categories. So you have to meet one of these categories. There's a whole list of categories. I've only included some common examples here, but Occupations like engineer are probably the most common. That includes software engineers, economists, so if you're in a more of a financial or economic role. The important things are you have to have a degree. There are no prevailing wages for TN. The TN is generally approved for 3 years. There's no limit on the number of renewals. But for entrepreneurs, this can be a tough one because you're not supposed to be, again, controlling the company. Again, if you're a minority holder of a company, like you own 10%, I don't personally perceive that as a problem for TN. But if you are a majority stake entrepreneur, I would say the TN is not the right application for you, even if you are Canadian or Mexican. The next visa is the O1, and the O1 is for individuals of quote-unquote extraordinary ability. And extraordinariness can be in anything. You could be an extraordinary chemist, you could be an extraordinary entrepreneur, you can be an extraordinary engineer, you could be an extraordinary pharmacist, but it's a question of can you demonstrate that extraordinary ability. This can be a really good category for entrepreneurs because there's no ownership issues here, but you are going to have to demonstrate what makes you extraordinary. And so there can be a chicken and egg question that comes with this O1, and it depends on how you're getting to that O1. If you have done research here at the university, and you're spinning that research out, you'll get the O1 based on your research. It's going to be really about the success of your company. And so your company needs to show the success, to show that you are a successful entrepreneur before you can get the O1. So the question always like, how do I get to O1 status, which is often the most critical question in building a path to that, but there is not usually like some sort of special way to do it or things you can look out for, but most of the time when I'm advising entrepreneurs, the answer is run your business to the best of your ability. And if you're making your business successful, most of the things that you want to do to get an O1, if you're successful, they will happen. Okay. The next visa is called an E2. And this is a treaty-based visa. So the US has treaties with about 70 different countries. And if the business is at least 50% owned by nationals of that country, then owners, managers, individuals who have skills from that country can potentially come to work for that company here in the US. Importantly, India and China are not those countries. So India and China are two of the most populous countries in the world. They send a lot of people to the US, but they do not have the appropriate treaty in place to make this possible. To qualify beyond that ownership, you need to have two very important things in place. One is that there has been a quote-unquote substantial investment into the business. What is substantial is always relative to the business. So if you are starting a new consulting company, $15,000 might be substantial. If you are starting a new manufacturing company, several $100,000 or millions of dollars may be substantial. So there is no single number about what substantial is. It is totally based on what the company is. Any questions? What? Okay, so this list of countries is publicly available. Happy to share with anyone if they want to discuss, but it's a really, 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 really good option for entrepreneurs if you are creating a company that's going to have majority ownership from one of these treaty countries. E1 is listed out there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It is based on trade. Very few people are going to have this where they're starting a company here. But if you have a company where the majority of the trade is occurring between the US and a foreign company, and it's a treaty-based country, you can get an E1 visa. So if you are a foreign founder, the situation where this most typically occurs is that you create your US company, but for labor cost issues, you potentially founded a lot of your team abroad. So, an example would be Pakistan is a treaty country. So you say, hey, we're building a software development team. Almost all of the workers are in Pakistan because it's a lot cheaper to hire in Pakistan than the US. And your company, you have US clients and you're sending all the money to Pakistan. That would be an E1 trade-based visa, but it's a very specific fact pattern that's going to enable that. The next visas I'm going to go over are intra-company transfers. Again, this is not really useful when you're starting a company in the US and trying to stay here. But again, if you're looking at developing a team, and it makes sense to start working abroad, you want to open a possibility to come back to the US, this is a really good option. So the L1A is an intra-company transfer where there is a company outside the US, there's a company inside the US, and a person is moving from the foreign company to the US company. So again, like whether for market purposes or labor cost purposes, it makes sense to go abroad and build your team in another country first. Then, once you've worked for that company for a year, if there is a team abroad that will stay there, then an owner, a manager, or an executive can come back to the US to work for the US company. Okay, so that is the vast majority of employment-based visas. Yes?
Sorry, in previous one, is
Yeah.
there any country exempted from that?
Any country can be possible here. So there's no limitation on the countries. Okay. So the next one I'm going to talk about is just visitor visas. And these are not work authorized visas, but they're important to understand both from a company ownership perspective and from a entrepreneurship perspective. So there are certain countries where individuals can visit the US on something called ESTA. ESTA is the ability to enter the US for 90 days without a visa. Everyone else needs a visitor visa called a B visa to come to the US. It's important to know about these because if you have foreign funders or you have foreign team and you want to bring them to the US just even for a meeting or a conference, it's important to know how this works. That you have to potentially get a visa to come to the US, even for just to come for a conference. Oftentimes people get tripped up because they're saying, they want to bring someone, they have distributed team, they have a programming team that is working in Mexico or Argentina or Eastern Europe, saying, hey, we have this amazing conference, we want you to come, and it's in 3 weeks, we booked you a flight. Well, you got the flight, but you didn't have a visa, and they couldn't get here because they're not going to get a visa in 3 weeks. So it does require a little advanced planning. The other thing to know is it's really important for foreign founders, because if you are not yet able to pursue one of these other visas that's work authorized, you are probably going to want to come visit to have meetings, to potentially set up your company, to have go pitch investors, to talk to prospective or current clients, and you're going to need to be here on a visitor visa until you can pursue one of these work authorized visas. So it is totally lawful to be here setting up a company, but you can't be on any US payroll while you're here on one of these visitor visas. Okay. So that is a very high level overview of visas and the ability to visit. Next, I'm going to talk quickly about green card options. And it's important to understand these both from the individual perspective and from the company perspective. So if you are the foreign founder, the fastest path possible to getting green cards is going to depend on where you were born and what your skill set is. There are different wait times for different green card categories for how long it takes to actually get a green card. There are structurally additional wait times for most people born in India and China. And for that reason, foreign founders often want to be in this EB1. So EB1 is an extraordinary ability. It is the green card corollary of the O1 visa. The difference between an O1 and an EB1 is one of scale. So an O1 is for anyone who is extraordinary. The EB1 is the same standard and then an additional final test, which is, do you stand out as one of the best in your field, whatever your field is? And there's no perfect way to define that, but what I usually like to analogize is that if every player in the NBA was a foreign person, all of them would get O1 visas. They're all exceptionally good at basketball. However, perhaps only people who make the All-Star team would get EB1s. So it is a higher bar. Getting an O1 visa does not guarantee an EB1. But if you get an EB1 out of any visa status, you don't need an O1 first to get the EB1 approval. The second visa is the second green card program is a national interest waiver. National interest waiver is for people who are bringing substantial merit and value to the U.S. And the core idea is that regardless of whether there are other people who have the same skill set as you in the U.S., you're bringing so much value to the U.S. that the U.S. should want to keep you here. And so there are a couple of core ideas that go with that. First is that what you're doing has real value and national importance. That can be defined in a whole lot of different ways. It can be you're creating a technology that is good for the US, like it's going to create a lot of value. So if you're doing something like renewable energy, or you're doing some sort of pharmaceutical development, or you're doing something that's going to create new safety tools in industry, whatever it might be, where you can say like this is beneficial to the US and US workers and the economy, that's really great. The second way it can be nationally important is that even if a company has nothing that makes it like valuable as just an idea, if you are creating a lot of jobs, let's just say you're creating a new accounting firm, we're not going to pretend that accounting in and of itself is so important. Like I'm not to denigrate any accountants. Maybe their option is a law firm. I'm not going to pretend that we're doing something so innovative that it's like changing the U.S. economy. But if you create a law firm or an accounting firm that's now you have 25 or 30 employees, that's created a substantial economic impact that the government might give you credit for. So, a couple of things. USCIS recently amped up what they're looking for STEM graduates and entrepreneurs. So they've given a lot more clarity to people who have STEM degrees and to entrepreneurs who say it's a really good category for them to pursue a green card. So if you could say you're working in a critical or emerging technology field, that helps a lot from a STEM purpose for getting an NIW, whether it's your company or you're just an employee of that company. For entrepreneurs, it can be, again, if you are creating that value here, regardless of what the product is, they're looking at that as a positive. The most common green card category is something called a perm process. So the vast majority of people who work for companies go through this perm process, which is fundamentally a labor market test. And so the company is saying, we are looking to see if there's a qualified US citizen or permanent resident to do a job. And if we can't find one who meets our qualifications, then we can sponsor a foreign person for a green card on the basis that they meet those qualifications. And so it's a bit of a farce. Companies are never really looking to fill the jobs. It is an expensive box ticking process for companies to prove a negative that they never really intended on proving. But this is the way the vast majority of employees at companies go get a green card. And so if you are working for a company, it's important to know how this works. But also if you are an employer, you're hiring foreign talent full time, inevitably your employees will want to probably be sponsored for this at some point. What's important to note is that this is not available to entrepreneurs. The idea that if you own any significant portion of the company, and the company is really looking to fill the role, is not believable to the government. So they're going to say the position was never truly open. So if you own your ownership stake, and there's no single number that is a limit, but I would generally say anything that is 2 digits, 10% or more, this is probably not going to work for you for a green card process, which means you're looking at one of the other processes we already discussed, or something else. The last a couple more green cards we're going to talk about quickly. One, I throw this out there, very few people have money for this, but if you are the person who has $800,000 burning a hole in your pocket, the government is very happy for you to send that to a company and get a green card on that basis. You could be investing into your own company, you could be investing into another company, but you must personally invest that. You have to show the money going from your account into the company. You can't say, someone else invested into my company. You can't show that you invested $50,000 and it's now worth $800,000. You need to show that the $800,000 moved from your account into the company. And then you need to show a plan or already existence of having created 10 jobs inside the US. So that is the overview of immigration, hiring. I open the floor. Who has questions? I must have been really clear. Go ahead. You want? Sure. Go for it.
So with the market for innovation and entrepreneurship changing,
Uh-huh.
so some years we see medtech being at the top of this, other years we see different forms of technology. Do you think that that ebb and flow also influences what somebody who is coming from a different nation and wanting to be in business should be doing if they're trying to kind of fit into a certain?
I don't think it matters from an immigration perspective, like what industry it is, in terms of like making a compelling business or making having an opportunity to get investment with that the funds ebb and flow. Right now, like venture investors are making fewer investment into like SaaS companies, but are making tons of investments into biotech and energy tech. From an immigration perspective, no, that doesn't matter.
What are the, so you talked about a lot of options, some of which are fairly narrowly applied and some of which, okay, this is the bread and butter of, kind of what we would do in this setting. Could you kind of give folks an overview of, okay, this is kind of the bread and butter, we're gonna look here first, in a couple of, 2 or 3
It
sentences.
really all depends on the company and the individual. So like, I put all those options out there. Best thing is that if you are either the farm founder or you have an employee who you would be looking to sponsor for a visa, I would encourage the person to either use the EIR resources or talk to an immigration attorney to get the option, because H-1B is by far the most common. But again, if you're Singaporean, I would tell you, you should do an H-1B1.
Yeah.
And if you're Canadian and you're an engineer, you should definitely do a TN. So it will depend a little bit on what it is. It also depends a lot on the company. Companies that are doing a software product, generally what we see is H-1B is the most common, but far from alone. If you are in a hard science, you're doing you're doing a biotech or a chemical engineering product or something like that, O1s actually might be more common because you might be hiring a lot of PhDs. So if you're hiring PhDs with a lot of research and strong resumes, you're probably going to try to skip that H-1B process because you don't want to be subject to that lottery. And so if you can get to that O1, candidates who are really clearly qualified, you're probably just going to go straight to that path. So there is a little bit of industry piece there that is going to create a little bit more commonality of the visa type, depending on the kinds of roles they're being hired into.
Now, can you pursue multiple of these at the same time?
I'm sorry?
Can you pursue multiple of these at the same time and see which?
You can absolutely pursue multiples at the same time. It is not that common to pursue them all at once. Just because why are you spending the money on that unless you just have money to burn? But it's not uncommon to have a tiered strategy of let's try this first, and if that doesn't work, let's try something next. And so, right now, because it's the H-1B season, the H-1B is, for many companies, the easiest thing to pursue. And then other things get more complicated. So right now, in my firm, we have a lot of clients who's okay, this person may qualify for an O1, but it's not so clear cut that we just want to do that. But if we can get them through the H-1B lottery, we're absolutely it's a super 100% almost guaranteed approval. So let's put them through the H-1B lottery now. If they don't get it, okay, then let's do our O1. There's very little reason to, unless someone's expiring tomorrow, there's usually not a reason to do all those things at the same time. There are individuals I see it more in the green card process, where sometimes people will put multiple petitions out there at the same time, because especially the perm process takes so long. Right now it takes about 2 years to get through that process, that they don't want to wait for a result, they'll try to have like a backup plan started before they even get to a finish line.
When would you recommend starting the current process of these H-1B?
It will depend on the person, and it'll depend a little bit on your company. So there's a couple of different pieces to that. So someone who is, say, they're on H-1B, they get 6 years total. So I would tell you that you don't want to wait more than 4 years into the H-1B process to get started to make sure that they're not going to max out that H-1B. There's a different piece which is about company competitiveness and keeping talent. For the people who are on H-1B, getting a green card is clearly a priority and really important to that person. And so you generally want, even a startup probably wants to have a really clear communication with the employee about what their goals are, what they want to see in their timeline. And then from a recruiting perspective, it can be important too, because clearly someone choosing to work at a startup has a different goal than someone who wants to work at an Amazon or a Facebook. Like, they're not, it's not an apples to apples thing. But nonetheless, at the very, at that end of the spectrum, those companies are sponsoring green cards on the first day of employment. That's not true of all of companies in the US, but even companies that are not true startup mode, but maybe they have 50 employees, those companies might say, we're going to sponsor you for a green card in a year from starting. So if you're saying, we don't actually have any idea whatsoever, you might lose out on talent for people who are saying, comparing your options. Again, the person who rarely is measuring Facebook against TrueStart, because those are such wildly different experiences. But someone might very well consider working for a 50-person company versus working for a 5-person company. So I think it's important to at least have a notion of what that costs and what the company is willing to do at what point.